So I'm just going to dive right into it. There are a number of issues with how healthy communication is left out of the dialogue in the dating world duality of the gender war. You got the women telling women how to date and communicate, and you got the men telling men how to date and communicate. And neither of them include any of the actual research on healthy communication. Neither of them. It's really scary. So we know about a few areas of communication. There's from mediation, things like conflict resolution, restorative justice. There's negotiation. There's epistemology, when you're having a debate or discussion. Not an argument where you're arguing to hurt someone, but actually a conversation where you have opposing views and you're in dialogue. We know the correct answers. We've known the correct answers for nearly a century in almost every case. And neither side is telling you any of them. So that's a false choice. On the one hand, it's presented that you should be coddled and everyone is supposed to please you and be perfect for you when that standard is never held on you. You're not expected to be perfect, but everyone else is. Or you're supposed to be getting away with abusive communication. And people are just supposed to handle that. Neither of those are correct. So let's look at a few aspects. I'm going to deal with the most important one first because comment sections fail at this test repeatedly. The back and forth narratives fail repeatedly. If someone makes an argument in a debate or a discussion, you are required to show them where specifically they made a mistake and why it is provably true that what they said is false. That's called a rebuttal. I was a mod on a philosophy website when I was in middle school. This is the actual epistemological standard. This is how we find truth. If you don't provide a rebuttal, if you make any other commentary, you're attacking their character, you're making negative assumptions about them, you just claim you have the truth and repeat that claim. Whenever you don't provide a rebuttal, you are admitting that you don't have one. And you have just lost the debate. That is the actual standard. Now, I know that the vast majority of you never learned that standard. That's called being a peasant. If you do not provide a cogent rebuttal, you just failed the debate. And you spend all day long watching people shout at each other on screens, and none of them actually debate. They make counterclaims, they attack each other's character, they misrepresent what the other person said in order to tear down the misrepresentation. That's called a straw man argument. So if you don't learn how to have a debate, you can't claim that you're going to succeed at it. If you don't know what the fallacies are, if you can't even spell the word fallacy, you're definitely doomed to find truth. So that's first of all. If you haven't learned how to think clearly, you shouldn't be assuming that you have the right answer. Now I'm going to deal with the next most important one. Philosophers and mediators and negotiators have a proven track record of results going back a very long time. But something changed about a century ago. Suddenly, there were a group of people who became very popular in the media. Uninformed people liked them, which is never a good sign. Lots of people who didn't know anything thought that these guys were cool. And these guys started saying their opinions without any real support, no scientific backing. They just spouted their narrative, their opinion, based on a few examples. And that group of people is called psychologists. Psychologists and therapists consistently fail at basic epistemological tests. Philosophers had it right. Mediators and negotiators have a track record of success. There are forms of counseling that work. There are therapies that work. But therapists and psychologists are overwhelmingly just talking out of their other side. And you can see that this is the case because depending on a country's language, different therapies, different psychological modes become popular at different times. In Sweden, for the last couple decades, it's been popular to categorize everyone's personality according to 5 color types. And everyone interacting with anyone is supposedly just guaranteed to behave a certain way because of their color type. If you're a green interacting with an orange, it's always just going to go a certain way. That's only popular in Sweden. It's bounded within their language group, and it appeared recently. And that's what we see, bounded by language group, in all these different domains of therapy and psychology. Is every 15 to 25 years, that language group decides on a new form of therapy, and it's not based on science. It's just a popular opinion. So back in the 1970s, they thought that art therapy would stop society from being Charles Manson. Back in the early 2000s, they thought that you do a rebirthing thing. You pretend you're being born again, and that's going to cure you just by passing through a womb and a vulva. Didn't work. So when actual scientists who develop experimental protocols and have statistical tests for whether something is actually statistically significant, whether they've actually proven their hypothesis or not, when those scientists randomly selected psychology papers to redo them, they found that 2/3 of psychology papers are non-replicable, which means 2/3 of psychology research is bunk. It's made up garbage. 2 out of every 3 conclusions published by psychology researchers is not correct. And this has been shown multiple times for over 30 years. I knew about the research back in the early 2000s. So if you're pretending that psychology has the correct answer, you are completely misinformed, because we know as a scientific fact that they do not. The overwhelming majority of what you hear from a therapist is opinion farming. Sociologists do real research. If you read the research of Stanley Milgram, if you read the research of Solomon Asch, you read the research of Kahneman Tversky, that's real experimental design, where they're actually studying a lot of people and using statistically significant sample sizes. They're actually doing proper experimental protocol. Psychology researchers do not do that. You read the details of the experimental design in the psychology paper, they'll talk to 12 people, or maybe 300 of their own students. It's a joke. So that's the psychology research, and then you get into the therapists. And we have research on therapists too. So this was also decades ago. We've known this for decades. Some actual scientists took a whole lot of people who wanted to see therapists, and they randomly assigned those people to different forms of therapy. Whether you're going to a neo-Freudian or group therapy, all the different kinds of therapy were assigned the same number of people. They also assigned the same number of people to the control group. Control group, that's what you're supposed to do. The group of people who were told to not go to any therapy. And they were told, use the same amount of time and money to just do whatever you want to do. If you want to spend time with your family, if you want to pursue a hobby, you want to just take a nap, do it. Take the same amount of time and money and do your own thing. And what they found, tracking these people over time, is that the people who went to different forms of therapy all saw a benefit. There were benefits. People who go to therapy say, I've had benefits from therapy. Yes, that's what we see. People who go to therapy see a benefit. And all the therapies were roughly the same. Didn't really matter. Every kind of therapist you go to, you're going to see some benefit. And the people who didn't go to therapy saw twice as big of a benefit. And that's understandable because of a statistical property that we call regression to the mean. So your life goes through ups and downs, your whole life, and you're more likely to want to go to therapy when you're in one of the down spots. When you're down here is when people say, maybe I should go to therapy. But your life is going to go through ups and downs anyway. So if you're down, chances are you're going to be up later, just as a normal thing. This is the worst point in your life, you hit rock bottom, then you only have up to go. So when people are in the bottom of their life and they seek therapy, it's normal for their life to improve. On average, most people do, whether they see a therapist or not. And if you don't go to therapy, you see a bigger improvement than if you do. Which means between those two choices, going to a therapist is consistently worse for you. You do not get better results going to a therapist than you do just living your life. And we've known this for decades. This is the actual science on therapists. So if you're uninformed and just listening to media talking heads, they're going to advise therapy because it is a scam. And the therapists are going to tell you, seek therapy because it is a scam. And they don't want you to actually stop needing therapy because then they lose a customer. And that's the critical difference between the philosophers and the therapists. Philosophers are just telling you the answer. They don't get paid. Therapists get paid. And that's why you shouldn't automatically trust them. You should be suspicious of the person who only tells you the answer if you pay them. They want to keep you dependent. So I highly recommend you learn philosophy and mediation and negotiation instead of therapy. Read Sartre instead of going to a therapist. You will see better results in your life. So now let's go into some issues with communication and conflict resolution. So when they researched why people have escalatory arguments, they actually filmed people, slow-mo cam, high resolution, what was going on in the argument. Most arguments between couples are a result of a misunderstanding or a misrepresentation where they don't understand what the other person's saying. And then they don't seek clarification and they don't acknowledge each other. Instead, they interrupt. You can talk about the topic that they're arguing about. Most of the time, it's money that they're arguing about. But the reason it escalated, the reason it continued to become a worse argument, is because they're interrupting each other to say what they want to say, instead of understanding what the other person means and acknowledging that. So there was one study in particular showing this poignantly. Researchers love fucking with people. This is funny. They invited people over to do some survey or test that was just bogus. It was fake. And they're supposed to wait to be able to do that. And they have to wait in a waiting room. The waiting room was being filmed. That was the real test. The waiting room was where they got their data. So people were told to bring in a friend and then sit in this waiting room. And they're waiting and waiting, waiting. And sitting with your friend in a waiting room, you start chatting. Fun, chatty conversation. And a different group of people were told to bring their significant other, their relational partner. And sitting in a waiting room with your significant other for a long time, some of those people started arguing, thinking that they were alone when they were being filmed. And what they saw very particularly is that there are two different kinds of interruptions. The fun, chatty conversation, when someone's saying something and you interrupt in a fun, chatty conversation, it is because you have something you want to add to the conversation. You're enthusiastically in support of what the other person is talking about. You want to add something to enliven that dialogue. And when you want to add something to the conversation, you make some micro expression. You go, there's just a little gesture. It doesn't take long. It's often we don't even register it consciously. But there's a micro expression that happens from the person who wants to interrupt. And then the person who's speaking makes a micro expression back. Acquiescing. It is an interruption with consent. And the purpose of the interruption is to add to what the other person is saying. That is a fun, chatty conversation with an interruption. And in contrast, when couples were arguing and interrupting each other, it worked totally differently. One person is speaking, and before they're finished saying what they say, without warning, the other person starts to talk over them. And if the first person continues to speak, the interrupter will continue to speak over them louder and more emphatically. So it's a non-consensual interruption. And the reason they were interrupting was to discard what the other person was saying, not even to invalidate it. They weren't even saying, here's why you're wrong. They just ignore it. They want to silence the person they disagree with. So look at your own conversations with your significant other. When they were saying something that you didn't like to hear, did you start talking over them to silence them? That is not healthy. So instead, what we've known since the year I was born, this is the actual correct answer that we've known for decades now, is that both of you need to flip a coin. Flip a coin and you both take turns. You get a whole turn. It's not timed, it's when you're done. When you feel you've said everything and you're complete. When it's your turn, the other person doesn't get to interrupt. When it's their turn, you don't get to interrupt. They're saying something you disagree with, you're going to have to wait your turn. If you can't handle that, you're an infant. You're a toddler. You're not mature enough to be in a relationship. So when you're speaking, the point is to share honestly, to be honest. You have to say what's really going on. No one else can be held responsible for you being honest and forthright, because you do have free will and you're legally an adult. If you want to claim that you get to be in a relationship at all, you got to have your own communication handled. No one else can be held responsible for that. So you communicate, and then their job is to acknowledge you. This is the correct answer. This is how you de-escalate. This is how you resolve arguments with your significant other. When they acknowledge, they don't get to say, I get it. I understand. Yeah. That's not acknowledgement. You don't get to decide otherwise. The correct way to acknowledge is to show that you understand the concept that they're expressing by saying it in your own words. You have to describe what they're saying with enough detail. You have to be concrete and specific enough that they have an ability to correct any misunderstanding you have. That's critical. When you acknowledge, the purpose is twofold. So that, first of all, they know you were actually listening. And more importantly, they have an opportunity to correct any misunderstanding. If you just say, oh yeah, I get it, they don't know if you actually get what they were saying. You might be getting something totally different. So you are required to acknowledge the concept that the other person is saying in your own words, and you are required to use concrete examples and be specific and detailed enough that they are able to correct your misunderstandings. And if you refuse to do that, you are admitting that you hope to be an abuser. That's your plan. And if you don't already have the ability to do that, then you should not be in a relationship with anyone. You need to take yourself out of the dating market. So that's the most important issue with communication, is interruptions and acknowledgement. The other part is about being emotionally grounded and having emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence gets thrown around a lot, and people usually use it wrong. being emotionally intelligent does not mean that you're emotive. It doesn't mean you're loud about your feelings. If someone's throwing tantrums, if they're just being loud about their feelings, that's not emotional intelligence. That's dysregulation and histrionics. They want the microphone to talk about their emotions all the time. That's not healthy. Emotional regulation is when you are able to process your own feelings within yourself instead of needing someone else to do it for you. You don't need someone else to handle your feelings. If you can't do that, you are not mature enough to be in a relationship. Be honest. It doesn't mean that you hide your feelings. It's not stoicism. It means that you're honest about your feelings without using your feelings as a weapon against someone else. So we see dysregulation and abusive patterns when someone blames their bad behavior on their feelings as if the feelings had control of them. Well, I was angry and the anger took control of my body and I don't have free will anymore. And so it's the anger's fault that I did something abusive. That means that I'm not abusive, my anger is. There's no such thing. And then the layer of abuse and projection is to say the anger that controlled me against my will was caused by you. So it's really your fault when I was abusive. Only abusive people use that argument. Only. We all have free will. You are legally an adult. Every choice you make is your responsibility and you are to blame. So if you do any abusive behavior for whatever reason, it is entirely your responsibility to clean it up. And the thing that's supposed to motivate you to clean it up isn't the other person harassing you or reminding you. You need to feel enough empathy for how they're feeling to be willing to do that on your own. So if you're in a relationship with someone who doesn't admit that they're wrong, who doesn't try to clean up the mess they left when you're hurt, you know you're with an abuser. And if you're the one doing that, then you're the abuser. That's just what it is. Some other parts to communication and emotional intelligence. Affective empathy is when you feel the other person's emotion in your chest. And I have a whole video on real empathy versus people pleasing. Empathy is when you feel how they're feeling. And if you don't do that, then you're not loving them. It's just that simple. You can't claim that you love someone when you're just looking at them instead of feeling with them. And being in that state of empathy with their emotion doesn't mean they get to command you at all. You do not have to please or obey someone just because they have a feeling. But you do need to feel it with them. You don't have to agree with their judgments. You don't have to say things the way they like. You don't have to make them happy. All of those are subservient to an abuser. If someone's expecting you to make them happy, you know you're with an abuser. If you expect your partner to make you happy, you are the abuser. And when you're communicating, it is your responsibility to be honest about both what emotion you're feeling and why. Which means you need enough self-awareness to know what emotion you're feeling. So this is very different from emotive behavior where you're expressing an emotion. Maybe you're crying or shouting. That's very different from emotional awareness, where you understand why you're feeling that emotion. And I see this dichotomy happen a lot, where people are very loud about their feelings, but they're unaware of why they're having that feeling. Those people are not mature enough to participate in a relationship. So you need to express what you're feeling and why. And you need to be honest. And if you can't manage that, you need to do that work before you enter a relationship. You need to be an expert at that before you date, or else you are the abuser. It's not someone else's job to ask you in the way you like. I hear this a lot where people say that, well, they didn't ask me what I was feeling well enough. They have to be perfect inviting me so that I feel comfortable. Try inverting that. Those same people who say that their partner has to be perfect at asking, you have to ask me how I'm feeling in the perfect way before I'm willing to be honest about my feelings. Is that person asking their partner in the perfect way? So that's a one-sided standard. That's a standard that they're holding perfection over someone else without ever meeting it themselves. And we see this a lot where people frame themselves as a victim that needs to be coddled when they're actually abusers making insane demands of their partner. My partner has to be perfect or else I get to be horrible. They weren't perfect enough, so I'm the victim, and that justifies me being horrible. That is an abuser. Now, being abused doesn't mean you act pitiful or run around crying. When someone is using abusive tactics on me, I hit record. Like I said, I was a mod on a philosophy website as a kid. I will happily jump into that troll trap. I'll fight the flame war, and I use solid philosophical arguments. I use real epistemological arguments. So I usually win pretty quickly. When you communicate, you do not have to say the thing that they want to hear. That's a con artist. What you say is supposed to be honest. And then they need to show their honest feeling. And you need to receive it. And your culture doesn't do this. I'll say what I'm actually feeling. And if that upsets you, that's not me being bad, because I don't have a requirement ethically to say what you want to hear. But when you feel an emotional response or a judgment about me, you need to be honest about that so that I can receive and relate to what you're going through empathically. And that doesn't mean we're going to agree, but I will feel with you what you're feeling. That's healthy, responsible empathy without demanding that the other person please you or be what you wanted. And that's not anywhere in the conversation of men telling men how to date and communicate. And it's not anywhere in the conversation about how women tell women to date and communicate. It's completely removed from both of them, which is really scary. They're both advocating abusive behaviors and self-defeating communication patterns. So if you want to look up the concepts that I'm talking about, there's a few in particular. The classic in negotiation is Bill Urey, U-R-Y, getting to yes, getting past no, getting together. He talks about principled negotiation. He was the guy who resolved the Iran hostage crisis half a century ago. Got the students back from the hostage takers. So if you go to mediation, you're going to see those books on their shelf. Bill Urey. And the other one is just a general feature of communication when people are direct and multilateral, meaning they're honest about what they're thinking and feeling, and they work together to find a solution that works for both parties. That's the only healthy way to communicate. And what you'll see in both the manosphere and the TikTok dating coaches, they're both saying to be indirect and unilateral instead of direct and multilateral. To not say what you're actually thinking and feeling, and then to just act on your own without regard to the impact you have on others. And those are abusive behaviors in communication. They defeat your ability to relate. So, just letting you know, all that media you're consuming is designed to trap you in self-destructive behaviors. and they want you to pay for it. They want you to sign up for their seminar. They want you to buy their book. And they're just regurgitating things that are wrong, that are not based on any real research. I give my work away for free. I insist on the standards in others that I meet. And I know you don't like that. I feel it. And you need to grow up.